troubles and too much sin, tests will occur. Running a race we will never win without the word.
Good morning, good day, good evening, good overnight, whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome once again to Just Thoughts. Following the types. That's what we're going to be discussing tonight. We're going to do a different kind of Bible study than usual here, though we will be covering Scripture just the same. Before I begin this study, I want to take a few moments to discuss the overwhelming insanity that's going on now in our world, where sin has become seen as a virtue. Personal feelings have become more important than morality or reality. People are at war with God, and God is shunned, and the flesh and its most perverse desires are lifted up on high. The four hidden dynasties have done their job well. The family of the Kenites have successfully changed our world to accept all manner of perversion and abnormality as normal. Again, insanity is ever present. If you don't think so, take a few moments to watch some of the cringe, woke, progressive videos on YouTube or various other websites. You will see freaks of the kind never before fathomed, human beings disfigured by their own will, transforming themselves into demonic-looking creatures, and looks that make even the Sodomites and the Gomorrites, if they were still around, to blush for shame. All we see everywhere is opinionated youth with no intelligence. They know nothing of history, yet they are in college. They go to college to learn skills so that they can survive in the world or become better. In other words, find better jobs, make better pay. But all that's really happening is they're being brainwashed. Plenty of them angry, practicing the same old rhetoric that we've been hearing now for about a decade, practicing biased hypocrisy as if it were positively a virtuous attribute and philosophy. And then we see teachers of young kids, high school teachers, bragging about how they got away with teaching pride and perversion. How they got away with removing the American flag and replacing it with a pride flag. Teaching children gender fluidity and individual spurious pronouns which don't even really exist. And teaching acceptance and inclusivity of all that is repugnant and sickening to the eyes and the ears of the righteous, that is to say. An all-out attack of offense on nature, on science, biology, an attack on God, and all that is right and true, common and normal. The lie is now coveted far more than the truth. Facts are distorted to fit this new narrative. And none of these young people perceiving the deception which surely cannot be far away in this world of putrid farce and ignorant behavior. Now, the numbers show that the majority of the world is still made up of morally balanced people. Conventional wisdom that tells us folks are basically decent. But the silence of these basically decent, morally well-adjusted folks for fear of being labeled is deafening. Give me an example. I might post a lecture, or I might post a picture with a group of, let's say, fanatical football fans with a comment that says, just think how the world would be different if people put this much time into and energy into the reverence of God as they do into sports. And guess what? I'll get 30, 40, perhaps 50 shares. And as many as 50 likes. But if I post something that is anti-perversion, anti-woke, anti-pride, I get 3, perhaps 5 likes. 1, 2, maybe 3 shares. And I've noticed this is a trend, not only with my channel, but a lot of other people's channels who are basically good teachers teaching the truth. Seems to be true throughout the entire internet. And then people sit and wonder why our society is in free fall and decline. You know, I've said it before, and no doubt I will say it again. Silence is consent. Quiet sheep make easy prey. A watchman that will not sound a warning when he sees trouble will soon be swallowed up by that trouble, which he failed to warn of. The faithful, that is to say the true children of Israel, talking all the tribes here, not just the 2 that are widely known about in the world, are walking on eggshells. Walking on eggshells back to the wilderness of shame. Because they fear to enter into the promised land because of the giants and the pagans, when God can easily defeat all of these things. But I thought all this had to come to pass. Well, it does have to come to pass. But if we cease to fight the good fight until the victory comes through Christ, then what is our portion here? What are we doing here? When and where did God or Christ say to us, cease to sound the trumpet of warning to my children? In other words, hide from it and don't spread the message. He didn't. We are supposed to be here in this earth age continuing to work until the end, that we might greet Christ with a fully accredited time card, so to speak. In other words, that we have earned our way in this earth age. That's another thing, you know, I never ask people to like my videos. I have mentioned it a few times that, you know, they're getting fewer likes. I mean, when you get 700 views and you get 70 likes, that's 10%, okay? And guess what that does to algorithms? That means that nobody's going to see the videos. So are people ashamed of the message? Or am I a bad teacher? or what is going on. I know people have said, I just forgot to hit the like button. Well, you know, I go through and watch a plethora of things, and if I see something that's a good message, a good solid message, I don't even care if it's speaking of some things that I don't even really care about. If the message is good, I put a like by it. And I do that so that the video will get recognized, so that it will get into the YouTube algorithms, and so that people will see it. Not stay hidden amongst the lower decks so that no one can ever see them. But that's just me. That's just my thoughts thinking out loud here. So we're going to be talking about following the types here. Our Father's Word is so complete that sometimes we can simply follow examples and search out things like keywords or certain events. And in doing so, we can see a much deeper truth than we might have ever thought possible. Now, studying chapter by chapter, verse by verse, line by line, precept by precept is always the best thing. Yet there are some times when the subject or characters or types and examples or metaphors found in our Father's Word have so very much to teach us in little short lessons. Especially if we've already taken the time to know our Father's Word well enough to know the areas and the verses that we touch upon. In other words, if you go and you read a few verses from, let's say, Ezekiel or Isaiah or whatever, by now, if you're a student of our Father's Word of any number of months or years, you should basically know what the flow of the message is. And you should know what's pretty well written in the chapter. This is why we're going to look at types and examples this time, instead of going all the way through a bunch of scripture and verse. We will be covering scripture and verse here, but we're going to be focusing more on the types themselves. Today's lesson will be a journey where the types given us in quick succession probably have more to teach us than a very long and drawn out study of 4 or 5 chapters in a row. Now, I'm not saying we're not going to be covering that many chapters or what have you, but we're going to be going and touching on examples that God has shown us and even connected them together so that we can understand them by use of key words. And I'll show you as we go along. Now, I've been watching a number of other pastors recently, other teachers, and I am so dismayed at the way they are teaching. They will do long videos, longer than mine even, a 2-hour video. And they'll do entire sermons where they claim that they are going to reveal who the Antichrist is. They claim that they have knowledge to share about the identity of the Antichrist, but not one of them will ever name him. At least none of these that I've been listening to. Now, they will imply that it is Donald Trump, or they will say it is the Pope, or they will say it is Klaus Schwab or a number of other powerful figures in the world, or some as yet unknown dark and powerful person or kingly power that is to rise. But they do not say who the Antichrist is. This channel maintains that the Antichrist is Satan, is the opposer, is the destroyer, is the dragon, the serpent, whatever name you want to put on him. And naturally, there are teachers that teach that. But some of these people are so close with Scripture till I cannot fathom how they are missing it. I mean, they literally seem as though they've got the food in their mouth and they can taste it. But they will not commit. They cannot fathom that the Antichrist is Satan because they are tripped up over phraseology. Such phraseology as the word man, as in man of sin. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, or it is the number of a man, 666, Revelation chapter 13. So naturally they're thinking it's a man, a human being, a flesh man. I keep sitting here listening to them with great hope in my heart. Getting built up ever and ever more and getting let down. How can they not know who the Antichrist is? He is the opposite and opponent of Christ. He is not the opposite or an opponent of preachers or teachers or professors or theologians. He's the opposite of Christ. He wants to be God. He wants to be Christ. Have they not read enough of the Bible to know who that is? How did they not see it? Well, the only thing that I can surmise is that it has been hidden from their eyes so that they cannot see it. We're going to go now, and we're going to look at some places where just by keywords alone and just by types and examples and the metaphors given by God in His Word, which connect together even without the scriptural literacy, should be able to give anyone discernment as to who the Antichrist is, as to what he represents. That's what these types, these examples, these metaphors are for, is to reveal the truth. So we're going to begin with Pharaoh. Naturally, you've got Pharaoh, the Assyrian, the king of Babylon, Mystery Babylon, the dragon. You've got so many things, but we're going to begin here with Pharaoh and what he is called, and we're going to connect the types. We're going to begin in Ezekiel chapter 29. Ezekiel chapter 29. And before we begin this Bible study, as you should always do before you do any study in our Father's Word, let us go to our Father, the giver of all wisdom, and ask for guidance as we study these, His most holy words. So brothers and sisters, let us pray, and let us pray together. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, O Heavenly Father. We call upon you this day, Father, once again, gathered here and there, different times of the day or night, but still gathered together as your family, Father, as your many-membered body, to ask that you reveal the truth of these things to us. We ask you, Father, to shine the light of wisdom, to open eyes and ears and hearts and minds to be able to receive these truths, Father. And we ask these things, Father, nothing wavering, in that most holy and powerful name of Yeshua. Yeshua HaMashiach. Jesus, the true Christ, Christos. Amen and Amen. So again, we're going to be starting off Ezekiel chapter 29 here, and we're going to be talking about Pharaoh. And we're going to see Pharaoh labeled with a specific name here. Ezekiel chapter 29, verse 1. In the 10th year, in the 10th month, in the 12th day of the month, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, came to who? Ezekiel. Verse 2. Son of man, that is to say, man in the flesh, set thy face against Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and prophesy against him and against all Egypt. Okay? I want you to understand that and not miss any part of that. Prophesy against the king of Egypt and against all Egypt. What did Egypt represent to the Israelites? Bondage, idolatry, and pagan practices. Not only that, the pharaohs believed that they were descendants of God and gods themselves, in a manner of speaking. Verse 3. Speak and say, in other words, you say this to them, Ezekiel. Thus saith the Lord God. That's the entire title. That's Yehovah Elohim. Behold, I am against thee, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great dragon. Okay, don't skip over that. That lieth in the midst of his rivers, which has said, my river is mine own, and I have made it for myself. Now I want you to think about that for a moment, and in case you're missing what the river connotation is here, what was the river that flowed through Egypt? Naturally, it was the Nile. Did Pharaoh make that? No. Now, did Pharaoh make some estuaries off of it? Some little tributaries, what have you? Probably. But here's Pharaoh saying, my river is mine own. I have made it for myself. In other words, that's a prideful statement. And he's called the dragon here, and he is the king of a perverse kingdom. Do you see a type? Do you see who's actually being referred to here, metaphorically speaking? Behold, I am against thee, Pharaoh, king of Egypt. We're going to see Egypt used a little bit later when we get into Revelation chapter 11 on the spiritual level, so that you'll know exactly what Egypt we're talking about here. We're not necessarily just only talking about the land of Mizraim here, okay? And he's called the great dragon. How about that? Is that not a big clue for you? And he lieth in the midst of the rivers. In other words, what do rivers do? They run into the sea. You know what the sea's made up in the book of Revelation? The people. And he says, my river is mine own. I have made it for myself. In other words, he's got his own waters. He's got his own living waters, he thinks. But Christ is our living water. Verse 4. But I will put hooks in thy jaws, and I will cause the fish of thy rivers to stick unto thy scales. And I will bring thee up out of the midst of thy rivers, and all the fish of thy rivers shall stick unto thy scales. Now, what does this mean? All the fish of his river. You know, what did Christ tell his disciples to do? He said, come follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Okay, so fish takes on a deeper connotation here. These are the fish that stick to his scales. Now, we're not talking about literally fish sticking to a crocodile or to a king's body here. I want you to see the metaphor given here. Verse 5. And I will lead thee thrown into the wilderness. You know what the wilderness is? That's a wasteland, or the desert. How long do you think fish are going to live out in the desert? Out of the waters. Out of the thing that is life-sustaining to them. Thee and all the fish of thy rivers. Thou shalt fall upon the open fields. In other words, you're not going to be in the water. Thou shalt not be brought together nor gathered. In other words, you're going to be left out there. Left out in the desert. I have given thee for meat to the beasts of the field and to the fowls of heaven. In other words, you're out there to be food for the vultures and for the beasts of the field. Because basically, that's all a dead animal and a bunch of dead fish are good for. And the people, excuse me, that's probably a good analogy there. The animals that would attack a bunch of dead things in the desert would be what? Scavengers. Unclean animals. So look at the types you're being given here. Verse 6. And all the inhabitants of Egypt shall know that I am the Lord, because they have been a staff of reed to the house of Israel. Now, I want you to think about what a reed is. That's a little old thing that's about the size of a cattail. And it's about the consistency of a cattail. At least that's what we call them down here in the South. Probably up in the North too, where they grow. In other words, they're not good for a staff. A staff should be a piece of wood that you can lean on. You know, my rod and my staff, they comfort me. In other words, you grab a reed. What is a reed used for in the Bible? A reed is shaken of the wind. A reed bends and breaks. In other words, you have not been any strength to the house of Israel. You have used them. Verse 7. When they took hold of thee by thy hand, thou didst break and rend all their shoulder. In other words, you crammed a yoke on them. You rent their shoulder. And when they leaned upon thee, thou breakest. In other words, again, he's a reed. And madest all their loins to be a stand. In other words, they had to use their own muscles to stand up. They were already weakened. In other words, they were leaning on them for strength. Verse 8. Thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will bring a sword upon thee, and cut off man and beast out of thee. Now, is that what happened in Egypt? Well, as a matter of fact, you could say that that was largely what happened to Egypt when God decimated it to free the children of Israel out of it. But God also made a promise to Egypt that they would always be a nation. They would always be a base nation, but they would always be a nation. But here this says, I will bring a sword upon thee and cut off man and beast out of thee. Let me ask you, what is the beast system made up here on this earth? Well, they're made up of men. And what does Egypt symbolize again? Paganism, worship of false gods, ungodly practices. God said, I'm going to bring a sword upon you. Know what sword he's going to bring by any chance? Revelation chapter 1 verse 16. The sword that cuts two ways. The double-edged sword, the tongue of Christ. Verse 9. And the land of Egypt shall be desolate and waste. Okay, well, that did not happen to Egypt. Even after God decimated Egypt, that did not happen to them. They were wasted, but the land did not become desolate. People still live there, and it's always been a nation, and it's still a nation to this very day. So guess what? We're talking future here. This is a prophecy. The land of Egypt shall be desolate and waste. And they shall know that I am the Lord, because he has said, my river is mine, and I have made it. In other words, they're going to know the truth about who made the river. And believe you me, it is not Pharaoh. It is not the great dragon. It is not Satan. Verse 10. Behold, therefore, I am against thee and all thy rivers, and I will make the land of Egypt utterly waste and desolate. That's completely. From the tower of Syene unto the border of Ethiopia. Okay? So that's where we're going to stop here, because that's the relevant portion. Basically what was just said there is, I'm going to make Egypt where it's totally destroyed. Now, Egypt was destroyed by God in the sense of freeing the Israelites, did a lot of damage to it, but it still exists to this day. This looks at a time when it won't be even that. It won't even be a base nation anymore. It will be destroyed, a desolation. And I guarantee you, you can probably guess who the desolator that desolates it and the rest of the world is. So now we're going to look at Sodom and Egypt. Revelation chapter 11, and we're going to skip the first couple of verses here. We're going to begin at verse 3. Speaking of the two witnesses, this is what the Lord says. And I will give power unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. That's the clothes of mourning, okay? And that's 3.5 years, a little over, by the solar calendar. Naturally, the time has been shortened. Revelation chapter 9, verse 4. These are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. In other words, what does a candle do on a candlestick? It dispels the darkness. What about the olive tree? Eliah. What is that symbolic of? That's the oil of our people. That is a healing balm. It's not because the olive oil is healthy, though it is to be partaken of in food, but it represents the anointing. And these two candlesticks are anointed of God. And they stand before the God of the earth. In other words, he bears witness to them and of them. Verse 5. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth, and devoureth their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. Now, naturally, these people are not Godzilla. Okay? And that is not literal. They're not going to breathe fire and burn anybody to death. What is the fire from the altar of God? What is that symbolic of? It is symbolic of the Word of God. The fire is symbolic of the Holy Spirit. In other words, if any man will hurt them, the truth proceedeth out of their mouth. The Holy Spirit speaks through them and devours their enemies. If any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. This doesn't mean literally killed. It's talking about a mortality of the soul. In other words, they're going to be shut down. Verse 6. These have power to shut heaven that it rain not in the days of their prophecy. And have power over the waters to turn them to blood and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. Naturally, we're probably talking about Moses and Elijah here for various reasons, such as they are the ones that appeared with Christ on Mount Olivet, the Mount of the Transfiguration, that is to say. And who was it that turned the water to blood? Well, it was God that did that. But by whose hand? Well, by the hand of Aaron and Moses. But who was it that stopped the rain upon the earth? Elijah. And called down fire to devour his enemies. Elijah. Verse 7. And when they have finished their testimony, in other words, when their time is up, the beast that descendeth out of the bottomless pit, Revelation chapter 9, shall make war against them and shall overcome them and kill them. Now, naturally, this is their death of their flesh bodies. Is it going to kill their soul? No. Verse 8. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Now, was Christ crucified in Egypt? Nope. Was he crucified in the plain city of Sodom? No, because there's no inhabitant to that. So what does that tell you is being said here? This is a metaphor. They are as bad as Sodom and Egypt. Jerusalem, the holy city of God, the habitation of peace, has become as bad as Sodom and Egypt, whoring after false gods and doing that which is ungodly. committing fornication and doing all manner of sin. Where also our Lord was crucified, and yes, he was crucified, but was he crucified by accident, or was it murder? The murder of God, the murder of the Son of God, God with us, by the Kenite. This is why you need to see the types and the examples and the metaphors, or you're going to miss all this. We're going to go now and talk about Leviathan from Job chapter 41. Remember back what was said about Pharaoh just no time ago about putting hooks in his jaw? Well, that's going to be relevant here, because we're talking about the same one with Leviathan here, as another type and example and a metaphor. So Job chapter 41. Canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook? Now naturally Leviathan would be like a crocodile, okay? That's a metaphor for what he is. Or his tongue with the cord which thou lettest down, in other words, with a rope with a hook on it. Same difference as fishing today with a rod and reel, only bigger. In other words, can you do that to this Leviathan? No, you can't. Why? Because he's vastly more powerful than that. Now the word here, Leviathan, is H3882, and it is Leviathan from 3867. And it says a wreathed animal, an example, a serpent. Okay, so, wow, serpent. Who else is called a serpent? Especially the crocodile or some other large sea monster. Figuratively, the constellation of the dragon. Am I reaching here? Also, as a symbol of Babylon, Leviathan, mourning. In other words, mourning as in to mourn for the death of something. The constellation of the dragon, and the symbol of Babylon. Babylon being what? Confusion. Verse 2. Canst thou put an hook into his nose? Remember what we read about Pharaoh and putting hooks in his jaws. It's the same thing. Or bore his jaw through with a thorn. The answer is no. Now, could a human being do that to a crocodile? Not really. They might can put a hook in his nose, but it ain't going to do him very much good. They're certainly not going to be stupid enough to try to bore through his jaw. So that lets you know what, we're not talking about a literal crocodile here. We've been given the examples of a large sea monster. Again, what is the monster of the sea of people? You know, we're not talking about Godzilla again here, walking up out of the ocean and doing his scream and breathing fire. This is a metaphor. And we've connected to Pharaoh already. Pharaoh was what? The king of Egypt. That sinful land. Verse 3. Will he make many supplications unto thee? No. Will he speak soft words unto thee? Now, how can a crocodile speak soft words to you if we're talking about a crocodile? Verse 4. Will he make a covenant with thee? An agreement? Will thou take him for a servant forever? You know, this would probably be better translated, will you take him for your master forever, or your husbandman forever? Because after all, Leviathan here is a type of Satan, the Antichrist. Will thou play with him as with a bird? In other words, you going to fly away with him? Now, I just added that in, okay? That's not really what's intended by the verse, but still, if it makes sense, if the shoe fits, you know. Will thou bind him for thy maidens? No. In other words, the binding here for your maidens would be kind of like binding a man for your maiden daughters. Again, just a type, not the real reality. Verse 6. Shall the companions make a banquet of him? Shall they part him amongst the merchants? In other words, are they going to spread him around so that everybody eats of him? Verse 7. Canst thou fill his skin with barbed irons, or his head with fish spears? No, you can't. Again, this is a type. There is no weapon that's going to stand up against Satan except God. Christ's truth. Verse 8. Lay thy hand upon him. Remember the battle. Do no more. In other words, you're going to do battle with him. You're going to lay a hand upon him, metaphorically speaking here. This is not to touch him in the way that Eve did. But do no more. Why? God is going to do the rest. It's God that gives the victory. Verse 9. Behold, the hope of him is in vain. Shall not one be cast down even at the sight of him? In other words, he is a fearful sight when he comes in his glory. After all, he is a protecting cherubim, or was, but he still retains his power and his beauty. I mean, go read Isaiah 14 or Ezekiel 28. Verse 10. None is so fierce as to dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand before me? In other words, if you fear him, how are you going to stand before me? How are you going to represent God? Verse 11. Who hath prevented me that I should repay him? Whatsoever is under the whole heaven is mine. Yeah, that is possession right there. And that's God claiming possession. In other words, who is going to prevent me from repaying him for what he's done? Whatsoever is under the heaven is mine. And whatever is above the heaven is his as well. Whatever is out there in the universe belongs to God. Verse 12. I will not conceal his parts, nor his power, nor his comely proportion. In other words, I'm going to cast him right down there to you in all his glory. Verse 13. Who can discover the face of his garment? And who can come to him with his double bridle? In other words, no one. Okay, let's just put that right down where it meets the rubber meets the road. Nobody's going to discover the face of his garment. They're not going to get that close to him, other than who he lets to. And even a double bridle is not going to be able to have anything of effect on him. You're talking about a spiritual being here. You're not talking about a human being. If the Antichrist were a human being, all of these devices would probably work on him. Verse 14. Who can open the doors of his face? His teeth are terrible round about. In other words, spiritually, given as a crocodile, but basically what this is saying is, who can open the doors of his face? Who can get him to say what they want him to say, basically? His teeth are terrible roundabout. In other words, he'll say whatever he wants to say. That's what the mouth is for. Verse 15. His scales, remember we talked of scales just no time ago and fish being drawn to them and thrown out into the wilderness? His scales are his pride. Shut up together with as with a close seal. In other words, like armor. Verse 16. One is near to another, that no air can come between them. In other words, his own pride shields him, but it is his vanity. He is like a well-armored warrior. Why? Because he's supernatural. And he's got the world fool to think he's Christ. Which is why he bears the name Antichrist. In place of Christ, instead of Christ. In opposition to Christ. Verse 17. They are joined one to another. They stick together. They cannot be sundered. In other words, they cannot be separated. Satan cannot be reached, nor his mind changed. He has a thick, hard skin, in other words. And we're not talking about literal skin here. We're metaphorically speaking. In other words, he cannot be changed. Verse 18. By his sneezings, and that would be blowing out of the nostrils like a sneeze, a light doth shine. And his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Remember, Satan was once Lucifer, son of the morning. He still retains his beauty, and he still retains wisdom, only his wisdom is now nefarious and cunning. It is not truly wise as in blessed by God. It is a cunning, an underhanded cunning. Verse 19. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. In other words, he looks like he's got the Holy Spirit. The things that he say are illuminating. His words will seem to be lights of wisdom and the holy fire, yet that is a deception. Verse 20. Out of his nostrils goeth smoke, as out of a seething pot or cauldron. In other words, a seething pot or cauldron is something that you cook in. And the smoke rises out of his nose like the smoke of the pit that he opens up. Verse 21. His breath kindleth coals, and a flame goeth out of his mouth. Now, that is a flame. In other words, it's not the Holy Spirit, but it looks like the Holy Spirit. It's likened to the Spirit that came and sat upon the disciples and upon the Gentiles. That came and sat upon them. And they spake with other tongues. But this is strange fire, which he has kindled. It is not God's holy fire. It is a strange fire. Remember, Satan is a copycat. God has an altar with burning kindles and coals. And fire proceeds from God's mouth. God is the consuming fire. The holy fire. But Satan is a copycat. Verse 22. In his neck remaineth strength. In other words, he's stiff-necked. And sorrow is turned to joy before him. You know, this is kind of an awkward translation. It would be more clear to say that, or to translate this, dismay and faintness overturned before him. There is no article for the word joy to even be here. In other words, no sorrow is turned to joy. But if you want to use this as an example, yeah, Satan is thrilled. Satan is thrilled to death for everyone that he deceives. The sorrow that he brings upon the world is joy to him. Okay? So we'll let that stand as it's translated for that. I don't know what the translators intended by that, but it's not a really good translation. Verse 23. The flakes of his flesh are joined together. Again, remember this is a metaphor, please. They are firm in themselves. They cannot be moved. Okay, now the word flesh here is the Hebrew word for flesh. It is basar. And the definition of basar is flesh from its freshness, by extension, body, person. Also, euphemistically, the pudenda of a man, which means his male organ. Again, body, fat or lean, fleshed, kinsman, kind, nakedness, self, skin. So what is being said here? The flakes of his person, his body, because Satan is not in the flesh. Satan will not be coming into the flesh. And he is male. Okay? That's what the whole meaning of the word man is when it comes to Satan. Not a flesh man. That's why it says pudenda. It lets you know what gender he is. In other words, flesh is used here as one who thinks in terms of the flesh, but not a flesh being. In other words, Satan is fallen in pride, is thinking of himself. Now the crocodile would be flesh, but then again, this is not speaking of a crocodile. It's a metaphor. It's not a reality. The reality is we're talking about Satan here. Verse 24. His heart, that is to say, his mind is firm as stone, made up, and as hard as a piece of nether millstone. His mind cannot be changed. Verse 25. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. By reason of breakings, they purify themselves. In other words, the only thing that's breakings with them is their bowels for fear of him. Why? He's a supernatural being. And they think he's Christ. They wouldn't dare to say anything bad about the Lord Jesus. The only thing is, it's not Jesus. Verse 26. The sword of him that layeth at him cannot hold. The spear, the dart, nor the habergeon. In other words, no man's sword, no man's spear, no man's dart, no man's arrow, no man's weapon is going to defeat Satan. No human can defeat Satan. Okay? The only one that did defeat him was Yeshua, who overcame him and overcame death. But no man, no matter how valiant or strong, by himself can defeat Satan. Only with God can we ever hope to defeat Satan. Verse 27. He esteemeth iron as a straw, and brass as rotten wood. In other words, he's powerful. Verse 28. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones are turned with him into stubble. In other words, he cannot be defeated again, save by God. No weapon that man forms against him is going to hurt him. Verse 29. Darts are counted as stubble. He laugheth at the shaking of the spear. Now, naturally, nobody's going to be shaking a spear at him. But this is an analogy. If they did, he'd be going, ha ha ha. Verse 30. Sharp stones are under him. He spreadeth sharp-pointed things upon the mire. You know what mire is? That's mud. You know what happens if you walk in mud where there's sharp things? Guess what's going to happen to your feet? You're going to be cut up pretty bad and you're going to fall into the mire. You're going to sink into the mud. Verse 31. He maketh the deep to boil like a pot. He maketh the sea like a pot of ointment. In other words, he's going to have power to do miracles. And the sea of people is who we're referring to here. Could it be his ointment? Make him feel so good, the King of Kings? only he's not. Verse 32. He maketh a path to shine after him. One would think the deep to be hoary, that is to say, cold. Verse 33. Upon the earth is not his like, who is made without fear. In other words, there's none likened unto him. Why? Because he is the desolator. He is the most powerful being below God and Christ. That is to say, in the realm of the angelics. Verse 34. I want you to get this right real good, okay? He beholdeth all high things. In other words, he loves the high things, high and mighty. He is a king, lowercase, over all the children of pride. Okay, does that tell you who this is? He is the king of the children of pride. And believe it or not, we're not talking about the little rainbow flag waving perversive group here, although they do play into it. He is the father of pride, you could say. Again, read Isaiah chapter 14. Now we're going to continue on. We're going to leave here and we're going to go to Revelation chapter 12. We're going to talk about the dragon and the serpent, all things metaphors that we've already heard used here. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 7. And there was war in heaven. Now I know you know when this happens, if you've studied our Father's Word for any time. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And the dragon fought and his angels. In other words, the angels that followed him, that 1/3, his fallen angels, the locust army of the book of Revelation chapter 9 that he frees from the pit. Verse 8. And prevailed not. In other words, Satan did not prevail. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. Going to be cast out to the earth. Verse 9. And that great dragon, now what was Pharaoh called a while ago? Great dragon? Was cast out. That old serpent, what serpent? The serpent from the garden, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Again, Revelation chapter 9, this is when it begins. This is when they show up, and he claims to be Christ, and they claim to be the angels of heaven. And they're not exactly lying, because that's where they came from. But read the book of Jude. They kept not their first habitation. They did that which is ungodly. Verse 10. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation, and strength, and the kingdom of our God, uppercase G, and the power of his Christ, uppercase C. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. Hey, you want to know what Satan's doing right now? Before he's cast down? He's accusing every one of you every time you mess up. And believe you me, he talks about me quite a bit. Because the other day I had to fix the brakes on my car and I sang a lovely tune. In other words, I would have made Ralphie's dad in A Christmas Story look like a choir boy with the language I was using, just out of sheer frustration and anger and forgetting myself. And I had a lot of repentance to do afterwards. Verse 11. And they overcame him. Who overcame him? The brethren. The ones he accused before God day and night. And what did they overcome him by? They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb. In other words, Christ's blood shed. And by the word of their testimony, the word of God. The word that God spake through them through the Holy Ruach. And they loved their lives they loved not their lives unto death. In other words, their flesh life was not more important to them than serving God. Now I want you to think about the difference between God's children who loved not their lives unto death and the Kenites who loved their lives. Or the earthly people who loved their lives, who put on their little rainbow hair and go out looking like freaks and march and drive around naked on bicycles in front of children. And go into the classrooms and teach children impressionable minds perversion. Do you think they're not going to answer for it? Verse 12. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. In other words, the heavens can rejoice because Satan is cast down. Woe unto the inhabitants of the earth. Woe means warning. And of the sea being sea of people, Revelation chapter 17. For the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath. He's mad, he's pissed, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. 5 months. Revelation chapter 9. Have you ever seen these people going out and trying to talk sense to these rainbow hairs and these pride waving flags and these woke idiots? The minute you start getting the upper hand on one of them using logic, wisdom, and truth, they turn to wrath and scorn and insults. See, Satan's coming down here with a mission. He hates the whore that he's trying to deceive. Why? Because they're God's children. He doesn't get to have his own dominion. He knows his days are numbered, so he's going to take as many of God's children with him as he can. Verse 13. And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. In other words, you could say Mother Earth if you want to, if that makes you feel good, but we're talking about Mother Israel here. Verse 14. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle. Oh, she's going to fly away. No, not a bit of it. That she might fly into the wilderness. In other words, into the desert, into the wilderness, into the waste, into her place where she is nourished for a time, 1, and times, 2, 3, and a half time from the face of the serpent. In other words, 3.5 years, but we know that's been shortened to 5 months. Now, some people will say this is 2.5 months. I don't really care. Like I said, I'll be delighted if it's 2.5 months. But Christ himself told us 5 months. So I'm not going to dispute with Christ. A time and times and a half time is 3.5. And perhaps it has something to do with time. Perhaps when the one world government system is building up, she is nourished from the face of the serpent. Why? Because he isn't showing his face. I think when Satan is finally cast down, from that moment on we have 5 months. But the build-up of the governments, under the power of Satan and the Kenite, yeah, I would definitely say. In other words, you're going to be spared. It's not going to have the effect on you it has on the rest of the world. At least not enough to hurt you. Verse 15. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. Remember the flood of Noah that was on the earth for 150 days? 5 months? Verse 16. And the earth helped the woman. And the earth opened up her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. Now, is earth actually going to open up a big sinkhole and swallow a flood here? No. What are the children that are of the earth called here? What do we dwell in? We dwell in the clay bodies. In other words, those of us that are chosen to do a job for God are going to dispel the lies of Satan. going to swallow up that flood of lies that the dragon cast out of his mouth, so that it is no more. Verse 17. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Okay, so there you have it. There you have it. They keep the commandment of God, the commandments of God, and they have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Did that say the testimony of Muhammad? Did that say the testimony of Shiva, or Buddha, or Confucius, or Baal, or Romulus and Remus and Zeus? No. It said the testimony of Jesus Christ, which is Yeshua Christos. Two different languages. Now, for our final little tidbit here, we're going to go and we're going to meet Babylon's king, the king of confusion, Nebuchadnezzar. But we're going to see a thing here and a work through Nebuchadnezzar where God blessed him mightily through punishment. And Nebuchadnezzar, being a flesh man, was smart enough to see what was happening and which way the wind was blowing, and he joined God's side. Whereas Satan never will. Because Satan has a flinty, rock-hard, nether flint heart. Daniel chapter 4 and verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell upon the earth. This is to even to you today, friend. Peace be multiplied unto you. That was a very generous greeting from a king that was wicked in the beginning. Verse 2. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God hath wrought towards me. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar was like unto Satan, but Nebuchadnezzar was able to be turned around. Why? Because he had a choice. Just as all people upon this earth with free will have a choice, including the Kenite. Verse 3. How great are his signs and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. Great words from the king of Babylon. Verse 4. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in mine house, flourishing in my palace. In other words, this is before his conversion. Verse 5. And I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Verse 6. Therefore I made a decree to bring all the wise men of Babylon before me, all the wise men of confusion, that they might make known unto me the interpretation of the dream. Verse 7. Then came in the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers, and I told the dream before them. But they did not make known unto me the interpretation thereof, because they couldn't. Verse 8. But at the last, Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God. In other words, this was the God that Nebuchadnezzar believed in at that time, and in whom the spirit of the holy gods, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar didn't know which God was giving him the power, but he knew he had power. Got to remember your timeline here of where Nebuchadnezzar is, where he's telling this story. And before I told them the dream, saying, verse 9, O Belteshazzar, master of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in thee, and no secret troubleth thee, tell me the visions of my dream that I have seen, and the interpretation thereof. Verse 10. Thus were the visions of my head in my bed. I saw, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. In other words, it was a Very big, powerful tree. Now, I want you to think back to the book of Genesis. And I want you to think about the tree that was in the midst of the garden. The tree of the knowledge of the good and evil. It was in the midst of the garden. Garden symbolic of what? The earth. Now naturally it was in the Garden of Eden, which man was cast out of. But the height thereof was great. In other words, it was notable. A notable tree. Verse 11. The tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof was to the end of all the earth. Now I want you to remember, we're talking about Nebuchadnezzar's person here, okay? But we're talking about Satan metaphorically, spiritually. In other words, Satan, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, was once good, and he grew and was strong. He was a great servant of God when he was Lucifer. And his height, his fame, reached into the heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. In other words, he was known about worldwide then, the first earth age. Verse 12. And the leaves thereof were fair, beautiful tree. Satan was beautiful, still is. And the fruit thereof much. And in it was meat for all. And the beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowls of the heaven dwelt among the boughs thereof. Now I want you to listen to this last part. And all flesh was fed of it. Now naturally, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had wealth beyond measure, had crops, had the hanging gardens of Babylon, and he fed not only his people, the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, but also the children of Israel, and probably lots of other people that were under his service. But I want you to think about this metaphorically about Satan. It says all flesh was fed of it. In other words, what is Satan constantly trying to bewilder and to deceive? The flesh. And if you eat of it, if you partake of it, guess what? You're going to fall in deception. Verse 13. And I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher, an holy one came down from heaven. This is to say an angel, verse 14. And he cried aloud and said thus, hew down the tree and cut off his branches, shake off his leaves and scatter his fruit, and let the beasts get away from under it, and the fowls from his branches. In other words, this tree is going to be taken down, going to be brought down, as Satan was brought down in pride. Nevertheless, verse 15, nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beast, and to eat the grass of the and in the grass of the earth. Okay, I want you to, let's examine this verse now. Satan's fall was great. Naturally, this is happening to Nebuchadnezzar the man, okay? And this is going to happen to him. He's going to lose his kingdom for a time, but he will be restored. But I want you to think more about the prophetical here, more about the metaphor for Satan. In other words, nevertheless, leave his stump and roots in the earth. Where does Satan have most of his power? In the earth. Even with a band of iron and brass. In other words, fettered in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven. In other words, he's going to be kept alive, and let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. In other words, where is the only place that Satan is allowed to deceive now? In the earth. Okay? Now, you can look at this to the historical of what happened to Nebuchadnezzar, and yes, it is a perfect hands-on match. Because it is a historical fact. But don't miss the Satan in this. Don't miss the metaphor. Verse 16. Let his heart be changed from a man's heart to a beast's heart be given unto him. Or let a beast's heart be given unto him. And let 7 times pass over him. You know, this was the original time that was to be Satan's tribulation. 7 years. 2 3.5 year points. The first 3.5 years, the buildup of one world government. The last 3.5 years shortened to 5 months. Revelation chapter 9, verse 17. This matter is by decree of the watchers, and by the demand of the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. Now, again, this is what is going to happen with Nebuchadnezzar. But God is the ruler of heaven and earth, the kingdom of men, even though it is Satan's kingdom. But God is the one who's going to set Satan up here as the Antichrist, cast him to the earth and give him the power. Because Satan is the basest or the lowest of men. Verse 18. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now thou, O Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof, for as much as all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known unto me the interpretation. In other words, all of his priests, all of his pastors, all of his seers, all of his prophets, the people of Babylon, that is to say confusion, cannot give the answer. But thou art able by the Spirit of the holy gods, for the Spirit of the holy gods is in thee. In other words, again, Nebuchadnezzar does not know who our God is at this time when he's speaking. So he says holy gods plural. But he knows that Daniel is gifted of God. Of what God he is uncertain. Verse 19. Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was astonied for 1 hour. In other words, he was astonished for 1 hour. 1 hour he was astonished before the king of Babylon. Isn't that something? It's almost like the hour of temptation. And his thoughts troubled him. I mean, your thoughts are going to trouble you during that hour. The king spake and said, Belteshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation thereof trouble thee. Belteshazzar answered and said, My lord, the dream be to them that hate thee, and the interpretation thereof to thine enemies. Verse 20. The tree that thou sawest, which grew and was strong, whose height reached unto heaven, and the sight to all of the earth. Verse 21, whose leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all, and under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and whose branches the fowls of the heaven had their habitation. Verse 22, is thou, O king? In other words, it's you, Nebuchadnezzar. However, remember, what is Nebuchadnezzar? He is the king of Babylon, the king of confusion. Who is the king of confusion of the end times? Satan. Now listen to what Daniel says to him. Thou art grown and become strong. For thy greatness is grown and reacheth unto heaven, and thy dominion to the end of the earth. Remember Satan's kingdom, where it will be? Verse 23. And whereas the king saw a watcher and an holy one coming down from heaven, saying, Hew down the tree and destroy it, yet leave the stump and the roots thereof in the earth, even with a band of iron or brass, in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 times pass over him. Again, prophecy. I want you to remember Satan is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And his power is to the end of the earth when he comes. But his power shall be destroyed. But he shall be allowed to live until after the millennium, when he shall be released for a short season before the judgment. Verse 24. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree from the Most High, that is to say, from God, which is come upon my Lord the king. Verse 25. They that shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. And they shall make thee eat grass as oxen, and they shall be wet with the dew of heaven. And 7 times shall pass over thee, till thou knowest that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. In other words, when you learn who God is, and when you learn who gave you this kingdom of Babylon, then you will be restored to your kingdom. Unlike Satan, who will not be. Verse 26. And whereas they commanded to leave the stump of the roots, thy kingdom shall be sure unto thee. And your kingdom's going to be here waiting on you. After that thou shalt have known that the heavens do rule. Verse 27. Wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto thee, and break off, that is to say, cease your sins by righteousness, and thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, if it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. That's it, that is to say, your peace of mind. Verse 28. All these things came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 29. And at the end of 12 months, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. Verse 30. And the king spake and said, Is not this great Babylon which I have built for my... let me start that over again, because I skipped a verse or skipped something. The king spake and said, Is this not great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom, that by my might and my power, for my honor and for my majesty? In other words, have I not, me, Nebuchadnezzar, built this kingdom? I want you to remember back to what Pharaoh said about his rivers. Are these not my rivers that I have made? In other words, pride. What was Satan's sin that caused him to fall? Pride. So the king of Babylon spake and said, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? In other words, didn't I do all this? Verse 31. And while the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, thy kingdom is departed from thee. Verse 32. And they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. Now, Satan's going to be kicked out of heaven, and his dwelling place is going to be with men and the beasts of the earth. And they shall make thee eat grass as oxen. And 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of man. 7, of course, being completeness. And giveth it to whomsoever he will. In other words, the only reason you are King Nebuchadnezzar is because God gave you this. You didn't do it by your might and your power. There's a lot of lessons in here for the woke, though they will never hear them. Verse 33. And the same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men and did eat grass as oxen. In other words, he came down to the earth and ate earthly food, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws. Again, Nebuchadnezzar in the reality. Verse 34. And at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me. No more confusion. And I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar now knows God. He now knows Yahovah. And he knows that God is God. Verse 35. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. And he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and amongst the inhabitants of the earth. And none can stay his hand or say unto him, what doest thou? In other words, nobody counsels God. Verse 36. At the same time my reason returned unto me. And for the glory of my kingdom, my honor and my brightness returned unto me. And my counselors and my lords sought unto me. And I was established my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. In other words, more than he had before. You see, Nebuchadnezzar learned the lesson. Satan will not. Verse 37. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King, uppercase K, of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways are judgment. And those that walk in pride, he is able to abase. In other words, who's the most prideful of all? And who is the most base of all? Satan. And look at the people on this earth now that worship pride, that worship pronouns. They've made a religion. They've even encroached on the religion of Christianity. Now Christian churches are teaching this doctrine, along with the schools and the colleges. What chance do our young ones have? At any rate, I hope you have seen these metaphors. I hope you have seen these types. I hope you have understood this. I pray so. And let me remind you, stay in your Father's Word every day. Every day in your Father's Word is a great day. And if you cannot afford to stay in your Father's Word every day, certainly stay in it weekly. Stay familiar with your Father's Word. And use the tools that God gave us to study His Word. The Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, the J.P. Green's Interlinear, the Smith's Bible Dictionary, the E.W. Bullinger Companion Bible, the Masoretic Text, the Septuagint. Whatever you can find to study our Father's Word. And always, always pray to our Father for guidance and wisdom when you're going to study our Father's Word. And brothers and sisters, always remember to pray for those that walk in darkness, because God knows they are the ones that need it the most. If you will, please like and subscribe and share the videos around so that this message gets out. And until we see you next time, may God bless you, and thank you for listening. This has been Just Thoughts.